Legends and tales from the classical Greek era speak of a grand and powerful civilization that once ruled the entirety of the mainland in ancient times. The resounding echoes of philosophers and historians from a time long gone emanate from the decrepit manuscripts of old, narrating a golden age of heroes, opulent palaces, and mighty kings who laid the foundations for the later classical Greek era to flourish. This is the rise of the Mycenaeans. In the epics of the renowned classical Greek writer Homer, he spoke of a powerful civilization of early Greeks who lived many centuries before his time, which he collectively referred to as the Achaeans, Danaans, or Argives. To the powerful Hittite civilization, they were the Achaea, but to modern historians, they are simply referred to as the Mycenaeans, a name taken from one of the most powerful city-states of the culture, Mycenae. This palace citadel complex was located in Argolis, in the northeastern Peloponnese. Archaeologists propose that the Mycenaeans rose to prominence sometime around the middle of the 2nd millennium BC. Their rise to power across the Aegean coincides with several natural calamities that befell the older and more advanced Minoan culture. As those on Crete grappled with significant setbacks due to cataclysmic events, their neighbors on the mainland reveled in the opportunity to usurp what the Minoan built over centuries, and started to exert their influence over their former rivals. However, according to numerous archaeologists and researchers, the Mycenaean civilization had a humble beginning, being heavily influenced by the Minoans. Aspects of Mycenaean art, architecture, palace-based living, religion, writing, trade, and metalworking all appear to have been influenced by the Minoans. Some have even gone as far as to claim the influence of the Minoans ultimately led to the emergence of the Mycenaean civilization. Unlike the earlier Minoans, the Mycenaeans spoke a form of Proto-Greek, a trait shared with several other cultures on the mainland. However, their society was markedly different. While early Minoan culture seemed to be devoid of war to some degree, the Mycenaeans' entire culture was built on a military aristocracy. Despite this, they were not a unified state under one ruler. Instead, they were a collection of loosely related, independent kingdoms or city-states scattered across the Greek mainland. Most of the individual dynasties were centered around a fortified palace complex. Some of the most powerful settlements of the era included Pylos to the south, Gloa, located north of Mycenae, Tiryns to its south, and smaller regions like Thebes and Athens, the latter of which would become a major settlement by the classical era. Mycenaean society was structured hierarchically, with a king known as the Wanax at the top of each city-state. The Wanax was a central figure of Mycenaean society, deeply involved in all aspects of culture, from religious matters to the micromanagement of the economy and all military actions. The Wanax also owned as much as 3/4 of all the land held by the city-state. Below the king on the hierarchical ladder was the Lauagetas, or the leader of the people. This individual was also considered a religious leader and often served in a general-like position in the military. Like many other Indo-European and Mediterranean cultures, an entourage of noble warriors, well-trained in chariot warfare, was at the heart of the culture. They were known as eketa, which translates to followers or companions. The everyday soldiers were called the lawas, simply translating to people. They bore iconic shields, shaped like a figure eight, accompanied by long spears and bronze swords that made them formidable foes on the battlefield, all sponsored by the state-run armory. The bulk of the eketa and those who filled bureaucratic roles would have lived within the walls of one of the central palace complexes, such as that found in Mycenae. The palace was constructed high on the summit of a large hill, with a commanding view of the Mycenae landscape. Throughout southern Greece, many of the Mycenaean palaces showcase similar architecture. All had a megaron, or throne room, the center of power and authority, which contained a raised central hearth. carefully positioned below an opening in the roof. A royal throne was often placed against a central wall just to the side of the hearth, allowing the Wanak's throne to observe those who approached the entrance. Meticulously painted frescoes often covered the walls, and sometimes the floor, portraying images of depicted battles, warriors hunting animals, and religious processions. Inside the palace, key industries, including the manufacturing of goods and weapons, olive oil, textiles, and perfume, were all carefully managed. The Mycenaeans were extremely particular when it came to records, and made use of a script known today as Linear B. This is another aspect of their culture that was adopted from the older Minoan alphabet, Linear A, which allowed the Mycenaeans to write down information in their native Greek tongue. They did so on clay tablets that, when deciphered, mainly focused on economic activities and administrative records of what went on within the palaces, including inventories of goods, workforce organization, and religious offerings. Like the Minoans of Crete, the Mycenaeans used ships, primarily for military and trade purposes. Their expertise in the Aegean Sea and proficiency in sailing would eventually set them up to become the most dominant culture in the region. However, the Minoan civilization would first have to face its demise, and it did. Sometime around 1600 BC, the Minoan colony and trading center of Thera, known today as Santorini, bore witness to one of the largest volcanic eruptions in ancient times. The entire island was devastated, and shockwaves of the cataclysmic event sent enormous tsunamis hurling toward coastal settlements on the Minoan mainland of Crete. Their fleets were decimated, and entire structures were washed out to sea. The carnage would have been unlike anything the Minoan ever witnessed, and this significantly weakened their civilization. But as determined people, they once again started to rebuild from the ground up. Only this time, their Mycenaean neighbors on the mainland had risen to prominence with a naval fleet of their own. In the centuries that followed, the Mycenaeans slowly conquered the Minoan islands throughout the Aegean, one by one in a likely prolonged war. With this, the Mycenaeans began to take control of the major trade routes that the Minoans had carefully created and managed for over a millennium. Still in control of their native homeland, the Minoans on Crete faced yet another devastating event when several enormous earthquakes rocked their island. Thousands perished in the wreckage, and the partially rebuilt ruins were once again turned to rubble. As the Minoans grappled with their dwindling population and the destruction across their island, the Mycenaeans used this time to further exert their control over the Aegean, which was evident by the spread of their pottery, art, architecture, religion, and weapons. With the greatly weakened Minoan culture facing upheaval as they struggled to rebuild their major settlements following the natural disasters, the Mycenaeans saw their chance. Some historians propose that a large-scale invasion of Crete took place around 1450 BC, a strategic move by the Mycenaeans to take advantage of the Minoans' weakened state. As Mycenaean ships arrived on Crete, their military prowess enabled them to take control of the island quickly. No doubt the Minoans put up a fight despite the ruined state of their civilization. However, as the Aketa and Laos cut through the resistance using their long spears in what would have been a prolonged conflict, one by one the great Minoan settlements fell. During this period, the remains of Minoan palaces at Malea, Zakros, and Phaistos were reduced to rubble. Gnosis also faced the wrath of the Mycenaean armies, having first destroyed the sacred Minoan palace before rebuilding it in their own image and establishing a Mycenaean ruling class to govern over the land. The early Greek spoken by the Mycenaeans became the administrative language of Crete, and the material culture shows parallels with mainland styles, which is evident in the architecture of tombs and pottery styles. The names of various Greek deities, such as Zeus, began to appear in tablets written in Linear B, and various distinct pottery shapes emerge on Crete, also providing us with further evidence that the Mycenaeans had successfully brought the native homeland of the Minoans under their command. Crete was relegated to a collection of second-rate Mycenaean states in the wake of the Mycenaean rise to power. The complete and undeniable subjection of the Minoans by the Mycenaeans appears to have been completed by around 1400 BC. For over 2,000 years, this brilliant civilization on Crete had elevated culture throughout the Aegean, but their time at the top ended abruptly, and now they would be forced to serve their new Mycenaean masters.